Well, usually I'll do a ride and talk, but I got a little inspired from semi-retired Bob, who does yard work while talking. Although I think he actually does the yard work video and then later on adds in the narration. But I'm going to do it the Rick way because, again, editing is not one of my strong skills, especially when the computer just loves to crash. So what I need to do, I got a million things I got to do today. I did a quick job in the morning. It wasn't much money. It was a very, very simple faucet replacement. So that's only about $50 in labor. It's for a friend of mine. They already had the faucet, so what can you do, right? But it was about an hour's worth of work, so better than nothing. Now, I haven't had a lot of time to do a lot of yard work. I've been busy taking stuff apart around here. And some scrap metal. So the area around my van has gotten pretty ugly. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and rake all this up. Now, if you look, you'll see. Take a look at this. This is how much material has built up in the driveway from about a month of no yard care, just from the trees. And of course, you got butterflies buzzing around, birds, all kinds of good stuff. My yard is basically a jungle. And here's the tarp my friend gave me. I need to replace the one that's on the roof to stop any more of those leaks until I can fix the roof the proper way. So I'm gonna go ahead and just keep raking, trying to get rid of some of this. I mean, it's just a mess. Now, a lot of this stuff in the yard, I just rake over here and put it in the yard. Looks like one of the lids from the old irrigation thing is floating around. Just kind of go in here and do some raking. Now, somehow, a lot of things in the yard tend to get knocked around. Now, here we have a couple of these old speaker magnets. I use these a lot for removing nails and for cleaning up. And again, it's a pretty messy place around here. So we'll just put these over here with the rest of the junk and just keep doing, I don't know what this is. Loctite. Huh. Something I got from somewhere, probably hard as a rock. I don't know. No, it's still good. So I guess this can go into the I can use it pile. And this little cap, this is off a headlight I replaced for a customer car. It's just a mess. Everything is a mess. It's kind of amazing how much material falls off of these trees and just from the air itself. But we just rake it all up in here into the yard. Then when we got it raked up, we use a lawnmower to grind it up. And there's also these seed pods and all this other stuff. Here's another thing from a customer job. Refrigerant can that goes in the scrapper pile. And just keep raking. Now the reason I use a rake instead of a leaf blower right now is it takes an awful lot of energy to move this stuff, the leaf blower, and the worst part is it just scatters all over the place. So I like to rake first, then mow to mulch, and then whatever's left over, I use a leaf blower. Much more efficient. So, hope everybody's having a good week so far. This was one of those sort of holiday weeks. You probably know. Everybody got a day, well, a lot of people got a day off. Some people didn't. If you worked in a store or something, you probably had to work on Monday. I've been getting days off, but it's not by choice. Work is just dead. Nobody is doing anything. And I think this is the beginning of what I would consider to be the next economic crash. I've seen this happen so many times in my life. Seems like every few years they have another one. And that's because our economy is nothing but a bunch of funny money created by central bankers to juice the economy. And that is a big problem because this kind of short-sighted thinking is basically what runs all, and I mean all of corporate around the world. Everybody looks for how can we make a short-term profit. We don't worry about long-term. No, it's always short-term. So what they'll do, they'll find a company that's pretty successful, produces a good product, maybe has a lot of customer satisfaction. Then they go, well, can we squeeze the customer? Can we tighten the margins a bit? Then what they'll do, they'll overpay for the company, and they'll use debt as a way to do it. So remember the leveraged buyouts that were going on in the 1980s? The so-called corporate raiders? Well, a lot of those people are still around to this day. You think about people like Carl Icahn, for example. These are basically just parasites that take advantage of people. They find a business and they say, well, we can make it more profitable. You can see what happened recently with some of these other companies. Companies that have a somewhat stable but not very popular business. They have a tendency to, I don't know, make changes. Look at what happened with the Cracker Barrel restaurants. I don't know if it was a publicity stunt or if they actually were that stupid, but I guess they figured that they could simply change the look, cut back on whatever quality they had, which wasn't much, and make more money. You see this a lot with these chain restaurants. I saw a video also about that, what is the name of that? Panera Bread place, or I don't know what it is. It's a store that basically sells duck food as a restaurant. And they seem to be losing money. Again, a lot of these companies come around. Somebody finances a concept. They may start out as sort of a homegrown business. The venture capital money comes in. They succeed for a while due to novelty. And then eventually, people get tired of them and they move on. You see this with a lot of things. Not just restaurants. Think about stores. Everything from department stores, grocery stores, whatever. At one time, you have a business that seems to have a good case for existing. And then over time, that business basically puts itself out of business because of greed and stupidity. That seems to be the standard around here, isn't it? I'll tell you one thing though. This will not last forever. Now, I know a lot of people, they think that the short-term corporate mentality can go on forever because it's gone on for a really long time. Now, one of the reasons why it's been able to go on is because of the ability to finance it. And this is important. Without the ability to finance bad decisions come to an end. That's a very important concept that people just don't seem to get. You can take advantage of people to a point. It's only a matter of time before they just get tired of it and they move on, if they have the choice. Now with government, one of the things they like to do is to change the rules and then make sure you have no choice. So they'll make laws and they'll do things to keep you captive and punish you if you don't play along with their system. Now, generally, the average person isn't going to go out of their way to oppose such a system. In fact, most people, they're just going to play along because they have too much to lose. Generally, the only people that work against the system are the ones that they have nothing to lose. They're a little bit on the crazy side or whatever. And you'll see them. Now, I remember we used to have in this neighborhood several people like that. Most of them, believe it or not, were vegans or vegetarians. And this is a really interesting thing. While the normal people, they would go for the regular lifestyle. They would love to have their weekend barbecues. Beef is what's for dinner. It was always sort of the vegan, vegetarian, fruitarian, whatever you want to call them, that went against the system. So as someone that found this fascinating, I always take my time to get to know these people. And the interesting thing is, even though I myself am a carnivore. This whole idea of going against the system appealed to me. Another reason, for a few months I actually tried to go plant-based. Although it did fail, I couldn't do it. My health wouldn't hold up. But in reality, to this day, I still admire the determination of people who decide to go off-grid or to leave the system. Now, what I never understood is why they always tended to have sort of a counterculture appearance. In other words, all the people that I knew that lived these different lifestyles, they always had some scraggly beard. They had just wore sort of ratty looking clothes, and which I do when I'm working, but you'd see them every time. So when you went to their home or wherever they were living, they'd have this real long scraggly beard, and they just looked like somebody that was homeless. It's like a lack of attention, usually kind of dirty, and didn't really take care of themselves. And I thought, well, maybe I can understand why people would do that as a way of trying to break free from the system. But I also thought it's not a really good ambassador for the lifestyle if you're going to be living like that, looking ratty all the time. It just doesn't make sense. Again, that's just the feeling that I had. Now, with that in mind, obviously, I thought it'd be kind of nice to do sort of the opposite thing. Now, in the 1980s, this whole yuppie thing kind of came into vogue. In the 70s, you had a lot of the counterculture where people had the sort of hippie look. That fell out of favor. But then when the yuppies came, they came up with these ridiculous ideas. For example, designer clothes. They started putting names of some individual designer or company or whatever on the clothes to make them stand out from the regular clothes. I thought was kind of interesting. If you lived in the 1980s and you knew about the designer jeans, the little jackets they wore. For example, when I was in high school, they had Jordache jeans. They had Gloria Vanderbilt jeans. They had, what else did they have? There were a lot of different brands that became popular. Then they started with different brands of shoes. Nike and Adidas and all that stuff. And then they even came up with the so-called members-only jacket. And I thought all that was pretty funny. But it probably was some type of a backlash against the whole hippie movement, which obviously died out. The main reason I think the hippie movement died out is because there wasn't really any money to be made off of it. If you were one of those people that was a hippie, you were basically talking about not participating in the system, not buying things that you don't really need. And that's a big threat to the system that we have. Now, a lot of people today, they say, well, it's just capitalism. Capitalism is a bad thing. But is it really a capitalist issue? Or is this something else? Well, in order to understand that, you have to understand what capitalism is. For example, I'm using a broom to move this stuff around. You'll notice down there you have a lawn service. They have their weed whackers, riding lawnmower, and blowers. Now they can finish that yard in, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes. If I had a yard like that, I'd probably spend 2 hours using the push mower that I have and this basic equipment. So, because they could do the yard much faster, that means they could cut more yards than I can. That's right. And the capital that they use is equipment. And of course, to some extent, their labor. But the main capital is the equipment. That would be like me digging a hole with a pick and shovel versus hooking up the auger and using the bobcat. So the idea of capitalism is that you can generate additional income from capital. Now, in the cases that I am explaining, this is capital that combines with labor and allows you to get more production. This is something that's been around through history, and it really makes a difference. Capitalism combined with a free market is a great way to get more wealth over time. So what's the problem? The problem is the free market is never allowed to continue for long. Why is that? Well, because if the free market is available, this causes the prices of goods and services to decrease in terms of the actual wealth that goes into it. Now, one of the reasons we don't see prices decrease very often is because the monetary system is designed to extract that wealth. So a brand new car in 1969 would have cost you $3,500. You get the 69 Charger with the 440 with air conditioning, maybe $3,800 by the time you added the accessories. What is that car worth today? $100,000, if you could even get it? Well, that's because the money supply continues to increase, which means that the price of everything goes up. But on the other hand, a television today, which may be 80 inches, costs less in real terms than it did in 1969. Why is that? That's because the technology, combined with all the research and development, went into building integrated circuits and LCD displays and so on, has made the cost of building a television much, much cheaper. That is despite the constant inflation of the monetary system. If it wasn't for the inflation of the monetary system, that $500 TV might actually cost $10. Because again, the monetary supply, money is constantly being increased in amount, which debases its value. The more you have of something, the less it's worth. Interesting, right? Well, when it really comes down to it, this is something there's not much we can do about, because every time that the current system begins to fail, the central bankers go in there and they cover it with more funny money. The system we have today is based on the banks constantly creating money, which then they can use to buy whatever they consider to be an asset. An asset is basically something that, well, one definition, something that's supposed to provide value, but a lot of what they call an asset doesn't actually provide value. It's just a form of debt. So if you think about it, what are the number one assets that a lot of banks buy? Government debt, bonds, bills, whatever it is. Short-term debt is called bills, and long-term debt is called bonds. Trouble is, all of this government debt loses value because the amount of money increases every single year. So, in order for the system to work, they have to pay an interest rate below what things are inflating at. So, you have to inflate. They typically inflate at least 5% a year. And then what they do, they make up a phony inflation rate of less than 5% a year. That way they can continue to get the banks to create money. Now, it's not, generally a bank is not going to create money to buy a bond. That doesn't make sense. You're going to create money that's going to lose money. That makes no sense. And if they did that, the central bank would have to buy every bit of the bonds that they buy just to keep the bank solvent. So, what they do is actually a little bit more sneaky. Here's their trick. Instead of buying the debt outright, what the banks do, they create money to buy things they consider to be assets. On a simple level, think about when you buy a house. You get the mortgage. What the bank basically did, they created the money for the mortgage, and then that money goes to pay whoever was the leaseholder for the property. Okay, and I say leaseholder because in the United States, ownership of property is illegal. All property is owned by the government through the state and county, and you have to pay them a lease every year called a property tax based on the unrealized gains of the property. Giant scam. And that's usually 2%. So in order for people to invest in real estate and not lose money, the value of that real estate has to go up at least 2% a year. This is another reason why the Federal Reserve insists that inflation must be at least 2% at all times. Because if it isn't, well, people will get upset. Now, the reality is, the real rate of inflation is at least double what they tell you it is. So how in the world do they not lose money? Well, again, since the banks create the money out of nothing, all they have to do is put the money back into the system through the bond market, and then at any time they want, they can create more money. As long as they maintain these bonds as so-called reserves, these reserves are money they can tap into when they need it at any time. They could sell the bonds on the open market, but what happens if nobody wants to buy them? What if everybody wises up? Well, it's very simple. The Federal Reserve comes in with quantitative easing and will buy them up, directly or indirectly. Now, the Fed generally doesn't buy long bonds, but it doesn't matter. As long as the banks can create more money, they don't care. And at any time, the Fed can simply buy anything from bonds to mortgage securities or whatever else it is and just hold them, because since the Fed creates money, they don't ever have to make a profit. At any time, they can just conjure up more money. Meanwhile, the cost of everything for us goes up and up and up. So it sounds like the infinite money glitch. Sounds like they can do this forever, doesn't it? Well, guess what? There is a limit to this game. Now, what is the limit? Is there a hard limit as to how much money they can create? Not at all.